Welcome to the Problematic Gaze with me, Dr. Lee Arnott.
And me, Dave Moore.
Each week we'll take a piece of pop culture from the last 60 years and examine it through the problematic lens. Is it problematic? If it is problematic, what does that say about society and culture then? And what does it say about society and culture now?
And before we take a deep dive into our chosen topic, we'll put it into context by taking a look at what was happening in the world at the time. So we'll have a look at what was going on in the news, what was happening on TV, and we'll scour the pop charts to see what the nation was singing along to.
Exactly. How was your week, Dave? Had a nice time?
I have. We've been entertaining this weekend. We had guests for Friday and Saturday. Very, very nice people. Good time was had by all. Absolutely exhausted now. My social juice has runneth out.
I suspect my invitation was lost in the post, but never mind. You know, that's the trouble with the Royal Mail these days, isn't it, darling?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we have such a wide scope of friends, you know, of all ilks. And sometimes, you know, people you can mix, and other people, you know, you should keep well and truly apart.
Can we get Natalie Cassidy on the phone, please?
So, yeah, it was great. It was great. Lots of cooking, which I do enjoy. But now I just want to eat a Finder's crispy pancake, and that's it.
Oh, there's a time and a place, love. A time and a place. I know exactly what you mean. When you've spent all that time doing the fancy pants stuff, you just want the simple, the comforts, home comforts. That's the word, the phrase I'm looking for. Home comforts. That's what you want. I know exactly what there's a time and place for a crispy pancake. Can you still get them, actually, after the Findus scandal a couple of years back? But
I'm not sure. What horse meat flavour?
Yes, obviously I don't eat meat, so I wouldn't worry about that. Mine would always be the cheese one.
Yeah,
but I've not seen a crispy pancake for years.
No, you wouldn't have liked it because we had lamb ratatouille, just nice slow cooked leg of lamb, meat just sliding off the bone. Not really your Strasser. Would you have liked what I tried cooking? Well, I didn't try cooking. I did cook it to great effect. Was a warm goat's cheese salad.
Yeah, lovely. I'm up for that. Totally up for that.
Very, very middle class.
I had speaking of nature and all things not naturist, a quite disturbing close encounter with nature this week. Listeners, if anybody's listening with their kids, you might want to get the kids out of the room at this point because this takes a very dark turn. So I was doing some work, just as you do, looked out the window and there's a pigeon, a female pigeon, just lying on the floor. And at first I thought she was doing that thing like crows do or blackbirds do when they sit and when it's hot and they sit with their feathers kind of out just to get themselves cooled off. So I thought, okay. As time wore on, it became apparent that she wasn't. And actually, she looked a little bit distressed. Not distressed, near death. So quick Google, pigeon not moving in my garden, suggested maybe it was dehydrated, to put some water out. And so I did, approach the pigeon. Pigeon didn't move, was just blinking at me, clearly not well. So I put some water out for it and then just left it, you know. And I went back in and thought, don't obsess over the pigeon. So came back about half an hour later. The pigeon moved position, water ignored. Just at that moment, I saw one of its wings start to kind of flap a bit feebly. And then the pigeon basically just died in front of me. Now, this is not the worst bit. This is not the worst bit. Because about half an hour later, its male pal, obviously its her pigeon husband, came down looking for and found her. And they followed a really heartbreaking scene of this male pigeon like poking her, cooing her, going, you know, and obviously this pigeon was dead. It's like, oh my God, this is so awful. But then the male pigeon jumped on her back and started to fucking hump her, humping the dead pigeon in front of me. And it was like, oh my God, this has gone a bit dark, hasn't it?
Man, you could write a film script about that.
Keeps coming back and forward, having a little poke again, and then jumping on for another little poke again. And eventually was like across the other side going, trying to get food, and then just fucked off and left her. And I thought, oh, well, that's not what you see on David Attenborough, is it? One last go, give it one last shot. Oh, she's no good to me now. I'm off. See ya.
Considering the subject matter we're going to talk about today, that's quite apt, really. Did I, just before we move on, did I tell you about the time I had to beat a rat to death?
No.
Okay, so listeners, I don't go around maiming small animals and murdering small animals for the fun of it. What happened was my dog was in the back garden, just happily trotting along. I took my eye off the dog, etc., and I heard this squeak, squeak, squeak. Turn around, dog got a rat in its mouth. Honestly, shat my pants because it was a rat and it was half dead. So I managed to prize it and I screamed the most highest pitched scream you could imagine. The dog was so shocked that it dropped the rat, but the rat was half dead. And me, in my frame of mind, was like, I can't leave a rat half dead and I can't just leave it to die in misery and abject pain. So what did I do? Brought the shovel out and had to beat the rat, the half dead rat that was going to die anyway, to death to put it out of its misery. I never thought my life would amount to beating rats to death, but there you go.
Well, I know this is a really weird turn of conversation we've had, but I've had to do a similar kind of thing with a mouse, and it was stuck on a sticky trap. Never buy those fucking sticky traps because they're inhumane. And it was nighttime. It was a full moon. I was watching the telly and I heard this really high-pitched squeaking. I think it was you. No, it wasn't. And I looked behind the sofa and there's a mouse stuck on a sticky trap. And of course, you can't pull them off because then you just pull them in half. So I had to take it outside in the garden, turn it face down, and under this full moon, I was beating it and sobbing at the same time. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like this. And I came back in and I said to my flatmate, we have to get rid of the fucking sticky mat and never do it ever again. And that was it. Oh, should we crash on? This is a bit dark.
But I think it just highlights to our listeners how humane and compassionate we are, really, ultimately.
Yeah. Well, some of us delete them, darling. So not that humane and compassionate, are we? Crashing on. What are we talking about this week, Dave?
So this week we're going to be focusing on the British sitcom Men Behaving Badly, which was written and created by Simon Nye and was first broadcast on ITV in 1992, and then it moved to BBC One from 1994 to 1998. So 6 series altogether. It follows the lives of flatmates Gary and Dermot. So Gary's played by Martin Clunes, Dermot's Harry Enfield, but then Harry Enfield got replaced in the second series by Neil Morrissey. And it followed their exploits, and the other major characters were Gary's girlfriend, Dorothy Bishop, played by Caroline Quentin, and it also focused on Tony Neil Morris's character's pursuit of the wonderful and fragrant Deborah Burton, played by the glorious Leslie Ash. So there it is in a nutshell.
What's your relationship with Men Behaving Badly? Men behaving badly?
I mean, it wasn't something that my go-to. I didn't set my alarm for it every week to avidly await the next episode. But if it was on, I would watch it. I found it quite inoffensive at the time. And we're talking about 30 years ago now, because the episode we're going to focus on was broadcast on the 29th of July 1994, so it's exactly 30 years ago.
Yes.
I was a student at the time this was going out, so I was out drinking a lot of beer in pubs. That's kind of the same as what's featured in this episode. But it wasn't my go-to thing, but I did quite enjoy it when I watched it. What about you?
Never watched it. I think it was just even the title of it just put me off, and it was contemporaneous with Ab Fab, so if ever there was a sitcom I was going to go to, Ab Fab seemed like a direct conversation with Men Behaving Badly. And the kind of new laddism really kind of turned me off. We'll talk about that a bit, I suspect. And so I never bothered with it. I'd figured it was going to be full of stuff I didn't want to see. And actually, I was quite pleasantly surprised at how innocuous it was and how how pathetic the two men in it really are. And funny, we talk about this, the exact date. When was this? The 25th of July, did you say?
29th of July.
When this one, 29th. We had just finished my first degree in drama. Hello. We were all thinking what we're going to do next. And it really reminds me of that last summer of 94 as a 21-year-old about to become a hugely successful actor. Spoiler alert, no. So it was, I didn't have any relationship with this show at all. And in fact, I can honestly say this was the very first episode I've seen of it. So should we have a little look at what was happening in 1994 then, Dave? Because there's some quite big things going on in the news, I see. Well, Nelson Mandela becomes the first South African president. after the ending of apartheid.
That's pretty major.
Yeah, the Channel Tunnel opens for the first time since the Ice Age. For millions of years, Britain is reconnected with mainland Europe.
Do you remember seeing the news footage? Obviously, a couple of
Yeah.
years prior to this, where they made the breakthrough and they shook hands through the hole, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing, really.
So Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin signed the Kremlin Accord in January of this year, which aimed to stop pre-programmed aiming of nuclear missiles towards each other's country. I think that probably meant they just turned them away from each other's country, and then in a split second they could turn them back aiming towards them.
Yes,
But I think
I'm
that,
sure. Yeah.
the sentiment was
Yeah.
there, wasn't it? Which is quite significant. And it
Yeah.
was kind of marked the end of the Cold War, so to speak.
Yes, it did. Yeah. Well, it was kind of the final ending of the Cold War because it's been the ending for a couple of years. For me, one of the biggest events of the year was Torval and Dean's return to the Winter Olympics of 1994 in Lillehammer, where they were, I'm not going to say another word, robbed of the gold because of all kinds of politics. There was a lot of raised eyebrows when they came back to the world of amateur international skating after being professional for 10 years after Bolero. So they were marked down accordingly. I'm sorry, it was a fix. There we go.
That completely passed me by.
Well, no patriot, you clearly. Also in February, it's when they discovered Fred West and Rosemary West murders, isn't it? Cromwell Street in Gloucester. That was a bit grim.
Really?
We'd gone to perform a show as part of our final year in Gloucester, and we were all a bit like touched by the horror of it, even though we were nowhere near of it. But, we were drama students in our 20s, so not dramatic by nature. But yeah, I mean, that was all very grim. And the more you read about that, the more it just... Ugh.
I remember watching it. It was like Davina McCall on Big Brother, wasn't it? What, fancy another one? Everyone was waiting for another body to come out, and it just didn't seem to stop. Hideous.
Yes. Yeah.
Horrendous.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, God, in Rwanda, the genocide begins in Kigali in April, and that's just absolutely horrendous. That's the ethnic killing. And about 100 days, Hutu militias just killed more than 1 million people in Rwanda. It's just astonishing. Although recent historians have said it's more likely to be 500,000 to 800,000 Tutsi deaths. People.
Wow.
It was just genocide, basically.
On a lighter note, in April of this year, Kurt Cobain commits suicide.
Oh my God, what a year. And then bloody hell, in May, Ayrton Senna, one of the Formula One champions, is killed in the San Marino Grand Prix. John Wayne Gacy's executed this year. He was the kick guy in America, serial killer of young boys and teenage boys who just dress as a clown. He gets executed this year. Yeah. Is there anything happy in this year? Can we have something happy?
Some really, really good news, actually.
O.J. Simpson murders Nicole Brown. And sorry. Sorry, you went for good news. But sorry, do you remember June? The police chase filmed.
I remember that.
Chasing fucking O.J. around LA.
Yeah. Gosh. But I was going to say on a lighter note, a really happy note, Michael Jackson marries Lisa Marie Presley.
Well, yeah, that's happy, isn't it? Yeah, that's going to last.
That went well.
There's a sarin gas attack in Japan on the Tokyo on the subway. It's 200 people, kills 8. By heck. That's only bloody July.
I know. And also in July, Jeff Bezos founds Amazon.
Wow. Gosh, wonder what happens to that.
30 years later. Is it true that he could end world hunger if he wanted to?
No, it wasn't. It was Elon Musk. Oh. And that bastard said about 2 years ago, he said, if anybody can put forward a proposal, I will end world hunger. And the WHO came forward with a detailed plan and said, this is what he does. And he's done fuck all about it. What was on the telly? Well, the top 10 shows of that year. Well, number one, not surprisingly, Torval and Dean, 24 million viewers. The thing that passed you by, living under a rock, Mr. Moore. The National Lottery Live is the second highest show of the year in this country.
Well, was it launched? I think it was.
No, I think it was launched a bit earlier. It's been on for a while before this.
Oh, okay.
And then Corrie, EastEnders, Heartbeat, Casualty are the next top shows in Britain of 1994.
Look at them viewing figures. Viewing figures for Coronation Street, 19.68 million. EastEnders, 19.3. And even at number 10, The Bill, 16.5 million. You just don't get those figures anymore, do you?
No, unless it's a big sporting event like the football or the Olympics or something. Or the, even Eurovision gets like 8 or 9, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There was a lot of shows that were still on telly.
The New Adventures of Superman makes its UK debut on 8th of January
Oh,
with
yeah.
Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. Dean Cain, I used to fancy him.
Yeah. He's gone a bit mad though, hasn't he?
Has he?
Yeah, he's gone a bit MAGA.
Oh,
Yeah.
disappointing. 14th of January, Brookside shows a lesbian kiss between two of its characters.
So we've talked about that already, haven't we? And how groundbreaking that was and how everybody lost
Yeah.
their fucking minds about it.
Absolutely Fabulous returns for a second series, now being shown on BBC One. This was on BBC Two to start with, wasn't it?
Being upgraded.
We must dedicate a special episode to Absolutely Fabulous at some point in the future.
Oh, of course, absolutely. I mean, there's still so many shows still going around, like Grange Hill is still going on. This is the year Jim Will Fix It ends.
Mm.
You know, this is when Jimmy Savile's long-running show, which has been going for nearly 20 years, comes to an end. I wonder what happened to Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest dedicating a special episode to him, but then no, that would be too much. Just feel a little bit sick in my mouth just thinking about that.
Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff. Spitting Image, Surprise, Surprise, Blockbusters, Telly Addict, Blind Date. They're all still knocking about. Beatles About is still knocking about. Going for Gold is still there. London's Burning. This Morning, Press Gang, Biker Grove. There's still so many TV shows. Stars in the Rise is still there. Darling Buds of May, The House of Elliot / The House of Idiot is going to end this year.
This is our era, isn't it? I think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, really.
It feels like this is when we probably, as students, we watched the most amount of TV. It just feels as though all these shows are hugely familiar to us, and it always surprises me how long ago they actually ended.
Yeah, I know, it's weird, isn't it? Shall we have a look at the music charts?
Let's do the music chart.
Ugh, number one. God. Love is all around.
Wet.
Was it from a film?
4 Weddings and a Funeral?
Yeah. I mean, number 3 is Meet the Flintstones. So there's clearly we're in the summer blockbuster time, isn't it?
The BBC 52s. Number 4, Crazy for You, Let Loose. I used to fancy them as well.
Don't remember them at all.
Don't you?
No, not at all. I got all excited there when I thought Searching by Cilla Black, but it's Searching by China Black. I don't know who China Black were.
Searching. I haven't warmed up my vocals, sorry.
Let's get ready to rumble. PJ and Duncan, number 11. There's quite a lot of shit, actually. Trouble, Shampoo, I know that.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit, actually, but memorable in their own way. I mean, this is a kind of year that you know exactly where you are in your life.
Yes.
Because of the songs around it.
Absolutely. Are you all right there, Deirdre Barlow, with your croaky voice?
I'm fine. I've drunk quite a bit this weekend. This has not really got my podcast voice on. But actually, I'm a bit less nasally than usual. I'm just a bit more gruff.
Bit more gruff, I'll be the judge. Oh my God, Sonia is back in the charts at number 61 with a cover of Hopelessly Devoted to You, which will spend 1 week in the chart and peak at number 61. I mean, it's all over for Sonia by that point, isn't it?
I mean, Olivia Newton-John, she weren't.
No, she weren't. God love her. I'm a bit disappointed with that chart, to be honest. It just seems full of summer crap.
Mm. Yeah, but again, like I say, memorable stuff. I mean, you know, most of the top 10 I could recite or I could sing if you really, really wanted me to, which I know you don't, but...
No, I don't, so let's crash on.
Okay, cool.
So, shall we talk about men behaving badly then?
Why don't you let us know what goes on in this episode?
So this episode is all about the hijinks that follow when Gary and Tony decide to employ a cleaner for their flat who turns out to be Portuguese and who Gary falls in love with and tries his best to bed, all the while keeping his girlfriend Dorothy away from her. Tony, meanwhile, is depressed about his job in a pub and decides to become a model. Then, in a vain effort to woo Deborah back, pretends that the cleaner, who happens to be Portuguese and lovely-looking, young, is his new girlfriend. And it all ends a little bit farcical and, well, the boys end up looking a bit pathetic, don't they? If I could just for a moment put my social historian hat on and look at the context for this show, because Men Behaving Badly is very much an example of the new laddism that was in very much popular culture at the time. And if you remember in the 80s when we had the new man, remember that poster, that famous Athena poster of the man holding a baby?
Oh, yeah.
new man was very much a media construct. Suddenly men were going to be helping out in the housework and helping women do their share of chores and stuff. And it was all bollocks. It was all absolute bollocks. And a survey done in 1996 shows that still 3% of men only help women with the housework. And new laddism was a kind of response to this media construct of the new man. What are you doing with your legs in the air like a spider? Are you...
I've got cramp.
Listener, if you could see, he's like he's like a beetle on his back trying to swing his legs around while I'm trying to give a bit of social history here. It's very distracting, I've got to say. Are you finished?
I am finished. Why can't we have like a proper podcast studio like the Seth Rogans of this world?
I know.
Because I'm sat here, buddy, kneeling down in my spare buddy bedroom.
I'm under a duvet teepee, basically.
We need to start making some bloody money with this podcast. So come on, listeners, share with your friends. We need to
tell your bloody friends, for God's sake. Anyway, back to my social history bit. So, New Laddism, particularly Loaded, which was launched in 1992, and the editor says this is a direct response to that starchy new man crap. And so the new lad and his image is suddenly everywhere in advertising. I don't remember if there was a famous advert for a new lad with washing powder. It was Ariel. And he was trying to wash a shirt and he couldn't work and he opened the packet the wrong way. And he was basically in all advertising and culture. And Men Behaving Madly is kind of an exemplar of this, the new lad in popular culture. And, the tone is set by the title sequence, which is pretty much lager, 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 japes and jinx, Gary shaving while Tony comes in and squirts shaving foam all over him. So this is the context for this sitcom. That's what's happening here. And that's what this response is to. And I guess it's one of the reasons I was saying earlier why I wasn't that bothered or interested in it. And of course, we're going to get the rise of the ladette in response to the lad. And I'm sure at some point we're going to talk about some of the TV shows that were for and by ladettes in the 90s, which is another construct that kind of fizzles out. But it just seems that the idea of the new lad gives lads a reason to behave like lads and to be the lager, shagging birds and all this stuff that Loaded and Maxim and FHM, are starting to promote ideas of.
How much do you think that this whole construct, you said about the new man and then the rise of the new lads, etc., is kind of just dictated to by advertising? And
it's all advertising. New Man was created by an advertising agencies in 1986 to 88. They're responsible for it, because they've got particular kind of products. And I mean, New Man is born of the kind of sexual ambiguity and femininity of Boy George and Prince, the New Romantics movements. And he hits his peak between 85 and 87. But that's because fashion, advertising, and marketing create the new man. There's a kind of confluence of the three of them putting it together. But he's got little impact. In the Glasgow Herald in the 25th of January 1996 says that the average British man seems to be more old boy than new man when it comes to housework. So although he's a thing that doesn't affect the lives of people in Britain. And a 1993 survey showed that 90% of men agreed that household chores should be shared, but less than a fifth ever did so. And another survey that year that said that the number of men who shared household tasks was less than 1% of couples surveyed. And this is like 6 or 7 years after New Man. So it's all bullshit.
It's all cynical advertising, money making. Yeah. This is what we want you all to follow now, and then the press get on board with it. Something else to write about, but nothing actually changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the pushback is the new lad, and actually what the new lad is the new lad is a derivation of the working class lad. And now it allows middle class lads to behave like working class lads. So you get this rise in boorishness, lager, 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 as I've said. So it's an interesting social construct and a social movement, but that's where it comes from at this time. And this show is, the reason we have this show.
Yeah. And actually, could I say right off the bat that I feel as though this show, Men Behaving Badly, and the episode in particular we watched, is a bit of a piss take of that culture. You know, the characters are chauvinistic,
Mm.
but they're chauvinistic in an idiotic and pointless way. I just feel it kind of takes the
Yeah.
wind out of that chauvinism because they
Yeah.
are they are the fools of the show, and it's very much the women, Deborah and Dorothy, who are the sensible, stable, authoritative, sensitive people of the show, even though it's actually geared around these two men. They're quite moronic, they're quite idiotic, they're clownish. You know, all right, they might have these kind of chauvinistic views and their ideas about women and sex, but it feels to me as though it's a send up of it. It takes the wind out of
I
it.
don't know if it's necessarily. I don't know if it's a send up of it, but I don't think it's necessarily celebrating it. Although at the time, contemporary critics did argue that actually it was celebrating it, and it did come into quite a lot of controversy.
Mhm.
But you're right that the characters are a little bit pathetic, but the program allows them to behave like this.
Mhm.
And even though you're right, Dorothy and Deborah, even though they invariably get the upper hand each episode, the men are still allowed to behave like this. Even though to their detriment, they look stupid doing it, it doesn't disparage them for behaving like this. It doesn't punish them for behaving like this. I think that's where maybe the previous controversy lay, in that maybe a certain viewer would watch this and think, well, we can do this, you know. I mean, because they are ultimately quite pathetic. There's nothing threatening about them.
No.
Yeah, they're a bit useless, aren't they? One thing that I was a bit confused about was how old were these men supposed to be?
I had the same issue. I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
Because they look, I think they look about 30, early 30s.
yes, but their setup and their characters would make you think that they're more like teenagers, to be fair.
Yeah.
To the extent where Tony even complains that he's got a zit on the end of his nose. But they clearly, Gary has a suit and works somewhere where he's got two people under him. The flat's okay, the flat's big enough, it's 90s sitcom flat. But I just couldn't work out how, and maybe, you know, because as we've said before, people aged differently back in the olden days. You know, 20 looked very much older than it does now, for example. But I just found it really confusing. Like the state of their flat, it was minging, it was filthy, there was just shit everywhere. But I honestly couldn't work it out. Do you remember This Life?
Yeah.
That show that's going to start on BBC Two a year after this, about the young lawyers in training in the flat share, the drama. They're obviously supposed to be the same age as those, I guess, but
It struck me as being a student flat that in
yeah,
a large shared house where nobody washes up, nobody cleans up, etc. But these are kind of
yeah,
like, well, especially Gary's like a young professional, and I just would have
yeah.
thought that it would have been tidier. And I just wonder if it's just there to accentuate the immaturity of these two characters, to accentuate the laddishness of it. And I wonder in this episode if it was always that untidy, or if they kind of accentuated a bit because of the storyline of having to hire a cleaner.
Yes, maybe, yeah. It was just really odd. And I remember that I'm trying to think of the first. Do you remember the first place you lived in after you graduated? You know, your first kind of professional flat share. I guess was a bit like this, but it wasn't as dirty or as minging
No,
as theirs was. They were just
not at all. Not at all. Okay, let's talk about the Portuguese cleaner Eleanor and her use as a device for conflict.
yeah. I mean, it was interesting that the funny foreigner was still had currency in 1994,
Mm.
isn't it? Which I was quite surprised at, actually. I thought comedy had moved on from funny foreigners and humor arising from funny foreigners and what they say, but that's still very much there in 94.
I mean, the only thing that didn't, I mean, obviously it's a sitcom, so, you know, situations are heightened for comedy value. But one of the things I found unbelievable was the fact that Gary was trying to seduce her, was infatuated with her, when in fact he's obviously got quite a solid relationship with his girlfriend Dorothy.
Yeah. And also was a little bit creepy.
Yeah.
You know, the fact she starts working, he just hangs around watching her and then brings her back and watches her and then brings her back and watches her again.
Yeah, and then lures her there under false pretenses to do
Yeah.
some more cleaning, whereas in fact he's there to seduce her. It reminded me very much. I don't know if you've watched recently Douglas is Cancelled. It just verged on the side of predatory sexual.
Yeah, it was a bit.
You know, after a while, I just thought, oh, this is just a little. It's starting to get a little bit creepy. And also, what I
Yeah.
found, I mean, Tony and Gary were competing over this woman as though she was a thing to be had.
Yes, and what was interesting is that they have conflict about it, but the characters are also allowed to bond over it.
Yeah,
And they have an argument at one point, and in the middle of the argument, they suddenly have a bonding moment, and then they go back to arguing again.
yeah,
So their male bond is very much intact at the end of the episode. And the end of the episode, I thought, was actually quite a sweet representation of male relationships and male friendship, you know.
yeah,
And I can see why it struck a chord with blokes watching, because it must have felt like here's a show that gets that kind of blokey relationship, that laddish relationship where you don't argue with your best mate over a girl. If you both can't fuck her, then you're still going to be mates and have a beer at the end. And I found that actually quite a sweet aspect of it,
yeah.
despite all the creepy predatory stuff and the fact they just pass between them.
And yeah, it kind of reminded. Yeah, you're talking about the scene at the end when you know everything had reached its kind of like comic conclusion, etc. And then the boys were just sat on the sofa with a beer, farting, laughing, watching telly, etc. Just being friends. And I just thought, well, you can't really kind of comment on that. I'm just thinking about us two when we shared a flat together and we were mates. We're still our mates, obviously, but we don't live together anymore. We would sit on the sofa, drinking, watching not football, but maybe The Gentle Touch or Cat's Eyes or something like that, and talking about men. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's just
absolutely.
It's human nature to. It's kind of a bonding experience, you know.
Are you trying to say we're blokes, darling?
The whole thing. I'm going on a tangent now, but about situation comedy. The story was in itself was quite flimsy, I thought. But what sells a situation comedy is its characters. So it was a very, very character driven this episode, and I'm presuming that the series in its entirety. So whatever the story is, it's always comes back to the character, and I think these characters are well written, well developed characters, and it's always situation comedy. You always often find just two people trapped in a situation, whereas these two blokes trapped in this house. It's like with Steptoe and Son, with the father and son trapped in the scrapyard, or Patsy and Adina trapped in their situation and stuff. So I thought as a comedy construct, it was really well conceived. And also, apart from the slightly problematic things that we've talked about, I thought it felt quite innocent. I didn't feel offended by it. I didn't feel by the laddie culture offended by that.
I think part of it is because the characters at some level recognize how pathetic they are. Yeah. Like Gary says at one point, my motto is I drink beer, I talk bollocks. They are allowed to have insight, I guess, and to be able to reflect on their uselessness, even though the script also, I suppose, it lets them have their cake and eat it, doesn't it? It lets them behave like that, but also lets them reflect on it.
Yeah.
There were some, going back to that kind of predatory thing, there were some other little things I noticed, like in the pub. I don't know if you noticed, Tony works in a pub at the beginning of the story, at the beginning of the episode. And the sign behind the bar says, "Warning, our waitresses pinch back," which just in hints of that. Still, there's that whole thing of women having just to be dealt with being touched by men irregularly in public spaces, which I thought was kind of a little interesting little moment. And I noticed one thing when Gary says to the cleaner, Elena, that she lives with a man, and she says, "Well, many English men are homosexuals," and he says, "You're thinking of the French." Well, that was actually quite nice. If we refer back to our Man About the House episode, when there's a mention of a homosexual, and it gets very limp-wristed and gets a bit stereotypical, whereas here there's none of that, which I thought was really quite refreshing and gave lie to my kind of reticence to watch this show back in the day, because I was frightened it would be that kind of homophobic, misogynist, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Actually, as I've seen, it just really was two pathetic blokes
Yeah.
who are a bit useless.
So next week, we're going to be watching something which I feel in my water we're going to have quite differing views on. So that I'm going to be very interested into hearing what you've got to say about the film from 1990, Pretty Woman.
It's a big one. It's a big one. Yeah. Pretty Woman. Down, 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 down. Yeah. Yeah, I think we might have very different. I've not seen Pretty Woman since 1990. So I'd be very interested to watch it now and see if it's the fairy tale I remember it was.
It really is, Lee. It really is. And I can vouch for that because it's one of my go-to movies. It's one of the things that if it's on TV and I'm sat in front of the telly, I will watch it through till the end. So I can't even begin to count how many times I've seen that film.
Dave, I'm really worried for you. I hope I don't destroy your dreams next week, honestly.
Well, I shall be putting up a pretty good fight, let me tell you, if you do try, if you do attempt to destroy.
In the meantime, if you'd like to follow us on our socials, please do at Podcast Gaze, GAZD. That's on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube are there. Please like and subscribe. Leave a review if you feel like it.
Yeah, so that was it. That was Men Behaving Badly. Till next week, Pretty Woman. I'm not talking about you there, Lee. Talk about the film.
Oh, see you later.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.